Well, it looks like we've got the stream all hooked up, the worldwide link up, and I'm here with my good pal Regina. This is the Friday FARcast. It's 2/21/20, and generally what happens, Regina, is people begin to kind of gather and show up and fill up the virtual auditorium, as it were.
Hmm.
So I spent a couple of minutes here, just kind of, usually shooting the shit and filling some time in a semi informational fashion. So let's just start talking. And how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. You asked me just a second to go off camera if I was able to get back on Facebook because that's kind of ticked off a lot of people that follow my interviews and that sort of thing, finding that I had been banned from Facebook. And I kept getting this notification that I was unauthorized, that my content was not appropriate for their audience. I mean, geez, they share snuff films. I mean, for heaven's sakes, you know.
I know, right? Yeah.
No, exactly. And so that my content wasn't appropriate for the audience and it wasn't authorized because it contained political content and ads, none of which was true. So I actually, Zeus and I, a week ago, drove down to Facebook headquarters. I thought, we're only 2 hours from it. Let's just see if I can get something going because no person will reach out to you. You can write all day long and it doesn't mean anything will get resolved. As some of your friends here, I'm sure have had that experience or know someone else who has. Went down there. It's trippy. It looks like the NSA or a military installation, except with some kindergarten primary colors for feel-good effect. But very heavy security all around, something like 20 different buildings all clustered together, each with their own secure entrance. And, it's all structured so that the people at the front desk are, very Silicon Valley. We're all in romper room together, happy. And they were very polite, very nice people, but they said, no, you can't actually see a person. So basically all you can do, even in that extreme circumstance, if you're willing to drive there, is they flip an iPad around and have you enter the problem. So I entered the most salacious of the options, which is malicious content.
Hmm.
So Maria, my site manager, I kept trying to post and it wasn't working. So I'd really kind of given up on it. And she texted me yesterday saying that she was able to share something because my name was the trigger. You couldn't put my name up and nor share any of my material through Facebook. So if I had a link to an interview or something, anyone around the world trying to share my interviews, which happens a lot, was blocked, especially if they were in the US. Australia, they were able to share a little bit. So they had this kind of weird limited block on it, but it certainly got a discussion going among the people that come to my site and myself that, we're in a time when we really have to start looking for other options because even being in that facility, it operates like the NSA. They don't have to tell you anything.
Well, they were started by the NSA.
Exactly.
It's Facebook's
By the
roots.
CIA and DARPA, the
That's
original
right.
developers for data mining, massive, the best data mining operation on the planet. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So
that's what it
form
feels like.
form follows function, right? I mean, that's what you're dealing with, and the architecture is symbolic of really what's going on behind the architecture.
It is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show because I started to receive from two separate sources that you'd been kicked off of Twitter and Facebook, and I'm like, wow.
Instagram. Yeah. Instagram could no
So
longer post.
so were you able to post on Twitter or not?
No, in fact, I haven't been using Twitter, and now this has encouraged me. Zeus did some research, and oddly enough, it was looking into the whole political scene and how information is shared, how
Mm-hmm.
disinformation and information is shared, and found that Twitter is kind of an interlinking platform between platforms. And I just had kind of ignored it because I originally had a consultant come on board and say, well, if you use Twitter, you have to tweet 5, 6 times a day. It's like, no, that's not my nature. I tweet if I think there's something important to share or say, might be
Mm-hmm.
every few days. So I didn't do it. Turns out you can do it however you want, right? The
Mm-hmm.
way
Right.
you feel comfortable. How do you do it?
Well, since nobody pays much attention to my tweets, it doesn't really matter. I somehow I've got 1,000 followers on Twitter, but it's not my medium. It's
Yeah.
not. It's not my media. I find Twitter to be like, if we were to break this down, we're going to talk about these breakdowns, these bicameralizations
Yes.
of media and culture. But if you wanted to break Twitter down, Twitter is the woke universe, right?
It is.
It is the woke universe, and it has that kind of that 2 minutes of Orwellian hate baked into it.
Don't like it.
Yeah, I think Twitter is vicious, absolutely vicious. And you and I were chatting a little bit before I hit start. And one of the things that we're going to get into today is this idea that we're in a time of reckoning, which I've been talking about for a long time. And Regina's got her own viewpoints around this. So we're gonna kick that around a little bit. But one of the things that Regina kind of her 3-point plan, I guess, was that we have to be nicer to each other. And you're not going to get nice on Twitter. Like,
No.
Twitter's not nice. And the other thing I noticed about all these social medias, or these mediums, these social mediums, is that they also create a brand of both personal and social programming.
Right.
So when you go into Twitter, you get sucked into the Twitter vortex. And then what happens in there within those 248 characters, you've got to be like a rabbit puncher, and you got to get in, and you got to sting hard. And what happens is that it is beginning to create a mindset, right? It creates a mindset, and it's socially engineering not just people on Twitter, but people in their own lives. And all the various social media platforms have this. For me, YouTube is the best because it's the long player. It's the 33 and a third, right? You could put it on and flip it over. And we're going to talk today for, over an hour. We can actually cogitate on some ideas. Twitter, it's not even a sound bite, I'm not a very good tweeter because it's not a medium that I do go to it and I do read it, because there's some interesting things. You want to look at trends and stuff like that. But I've been paying attention to a lot of millennials on Twitter. You want to study a millennial, or you want to study Gen Z, go to Twitter. And
yeah, and I have quite a few millennial followers of my work. It's an interesting, as you know from your own home there, it's an interesting demographic, and it's a problem. It's been a problem for Gaia. It was a problem when I had Conscious Media Network. It's been a problem for anyone that is essentially producing content that is esoteric in nature and goes across topics, because there is no demographic for it. So you get a little bit of everything. It's just people who are attempting to take on something new, a new concept, explore something new. What's that demographic? I have women who are 85 years old and young men who are 19 years old watching my videos, for example. So there's no steady demographic. You'd have to get into a very sophisticated field, which is being developed, called psychographics.
Psychographics has been around for quite a while. It was developed at Stanford Research Institute. I was checking psychographics out in the late 80s and the early 90s. And SRI, one of the first psychographic programs that they developed was for Ronald Reagan and his first election. And they were using the computer punch cards to get responses from people to understand the psychographic nature of who or who would not vote for Ronald Reagan. And so that's where it has its roots. It's all that Menlo Park, Palo Alto area, which we've looked at that area. I mean, it's a very intense driver for a particular bandwidth of our culture.
Absolutely. And, I think Cambridge Analytics certainly has it nailed, right? They've done a lovely job of going in and profiling people psychologically, and a lot of other sites. The thing I realized recently, I thought about this. This might have been what triggered the algorithm to get me kicked off of Facebook. And that was, I interviewed a guy named Jack Barsky, and he's a former KGB spy, right? East German, Stasi, recruited by the KGB, sent to the US, as in the Americans, to be an illegal embed and live a normal life with normal neighbors, ended up getting busted, just like in the show The Americans.
The Americans, yeah.
Sadly, the agent who moved next door, his version was Joe. Joe, the head of the that particular investigation with the FBI, moved in next door to him. And they were bugging him, going through his garbage. His whole house and garage was bugged to the hilt. They had people across the field with pretending to be ornithologists, watching his house with binoculars.
Right.
And he's a spy that didn't have a clue. I mean, it's a very interesting story. A clueless spy thinking he'd fallen off the radar because the KGB let him go under very weird circumstances, by the way. So anyway, I happened to put down that one of my live events on my site, for the patrons, was this chat with Jack Barsky. They could ask anything they ever wanted to know about the psychology and the nuts and bolts of being a real spy. And so I had in my post, I wrote, "We'll be meeting with former KGB spy Jack Barsky." Now, my site went down the next day. My Facebook page went down the next day. So it's possible that algorithm did it, right? But in any event, the man had some absolutely fascinating things to say about disinformation. And because this is part and parcel to the time of revelations, if you don't have discernment, if you don't develop your intuition and you're not connected to your gut and your heart, you're going to have a really hard time navigating the information flows today.
Absolutely.
And so I had to ask him, because it was on other people's minds. I said, how much are the Russians interfering in our perceptions of ourselves and our country and our political system? He said, heavily. He said, it's not so pat as they can easily just go in and change votes, which they can do to an extent. They can interfere in the voting process, but that's not how they work. They work to foment mistrust and hatred between people. And because our time's already ripe for that is the time of revolution, that's what we're in, they can really take advantage of the mass mindset to begin pitting us very violently against one another. So you start adding in groups like Cambridge Analytics that have it down to an impeccable science of manipulation. And we're really in a time that you mentioned earlier, why I said I think we need to be nice to each other. We're in a super complex time that I find sometimes fascinating, always. Sometimes I find myself with general feelings of despair, thinking, are people going to be able to discern the difference here? Can I discern the difference? I trust myself pretty well because I've been pretty consistent in what my gut and my heart resonate with. But, this gets us into a whole other, we can go down that rabbit hole for a while, which I'm happy to.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things which is, it's a really interesting dance, right? Because I think for people to live a life that's filtered and unfiltered, and what I mean by that is having a filter that really serves you, but unfiltered in the sense that you have to really examine your own bias, right? And because I think blowing up one's bias is really important, but not blowing up the bias to the extent that you completely decimate your filter, right? It's a really fine line and that's a real dance. We always have to at least for me, I have to cultivate that dance and work with that. Yeah.
I hear you. And so here we are, as I've been saying for years and hoping people wouldn't take it the wrong way, that I consider us to be in the time of what is biblically called revelations, but as applied to modern times, everything is out there for our review, pretty much. I mean, and if not, it's being revealed by the day. The systems are set up to allow us to have access to information, good, bad, ugly, truthful, and just flat out lies. It's all there for us to take a look at now and review. And as I said, this continues to progress, as you mentioned earlier. But then there comes a point, and I felt a very distinct turning point a couple of months ago. My biology felt it. And I think it's appropriate to say, like you said, and you've been talking about it yourself, and I use the same word. Now we're in the time of reckoning. Now that you have all this data laid out before you, and now that your emotions have been inflamed intentionally and manipulated intentionally, how do you buy yourself back and buy your truth back? Now, I've had so many friends who are also in despair. And we're right in the middle of all this, primaries in California, and I mean in America coming up, and California in another few weeks. And you have people, I think the biggest problem people are having, and that I'm hearing directly, is I just don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know who's telling the truth and who's lying. And you don't know what's being hidden from view. I totally get that. I mean,
that's part of the plan.
that is part of the plan. That's
Yep.
also why I don't, this is a little, I'm going to share this with your audience. This is also why I do not serve jury duty. I never have in my entire life. I wrote them about 20 years ago, and I said, look, this is a con game for each side to mislead the other and withhold evidence that's pertinent. I will not participate in this game, and I will never vote to convict, knowing that I'm not being given the full spectrum of information. They never called me again. So recently I'm reading an article somewhere. Yeah, I read a lot of articles. And it was talking about there's one sure way to get out of jury duty. Tell them you will not convict. So anyway, if you don't want to participate in that part of the process, which is kind of sad, because if you're an intelligent, fair-minded person, those kind of people are needed on juries.
I was going to say, you on a jury with 11 other people that had the similar mindset, that could be a very effective jury. And then what happens is we get juries that are very ineffective.
Yes, we do. And so I'm just bringing that up as, this whole notion that we are not being given truthful information. So I hear everyone saying this over and over, and especially my female friends, there's just this kind of look of helplessness. I don't know what to do. I don't know. I don't even want to vote. I don't think I should vote. Or I've never voted because I can't trust them. I hear this over and over, that they're not part of the process. And I always say the same thing, which is, you really not know the truth? Do you really believe that? What's your heart tell you? Now when you listen to a person speak, there's so much subtle information coming forward. People have records. You can see where people start changing their stories. You can see where the change of a story maybe starts benefiting a particular group of individuals or corporate interests or so forth. And so as you're evaluating that, like you said, bust your own paradigms, and you go in and say, yeah, why do I support that person? What has their record done? What do they stand for? What comes out of their eyes? And do I feel their heart? Now, this is a way to honestly start evaluating not just politics, but everything and everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Not to trust those finer feelings in themselves. And this is the biggest travesty of all, too.
Well, I think for me, I think there needs to be a distinction between emotions and heart.
Yes, big time.
Because when somebody says, "I don't know what to feel anymore," right? They're used to making decisions on an emotional basis.
Right.
And if their emotions are in conflict, there's no way they can make a clear and reasoned choice. Now, the heart is this organ, but it's also the spiritual capacity to feel, but it's not sentimental. The heart gets to the truth.
Exactly.
In order to get to the heart, you've got to move through this kind of morass of the emotional body. And, so it's, and so what we've seen here, this is what how I'm view. And by the way, before I go too far down this little rabbit hole, I just want to go back to something you said earlier,
sure.
which is it's not just the Russians who are interfering. You've got MI6.
All of it.
You've got the Israelis. You have the Chinese. You've got people inside of our own government and our own system, and every single one of them are jockeying for your attention and your mindset.
True.
Every single one of them.
Yes, and let me go ahead and add on to that, because it was the other part of what I should have added earlier. Barsky was saying, one of his first responses was kind of like, have you any idea how many elections around the world the U.S. interferes in?
Absolutely.
And I said, yes, absolutely. So let's feel ourselves chastened instead of pointing fingers at other people doing it to us. This is payback time. We've had the technology and the power to do this for a long time. We've been manipulating in other countries' affairs and sabotaging their elections. So,
Absolutely.
Shame on us. And shame on everyone for doing this.
Yeah. Well, this is the reckoning piece that you're talking about because it's all coming up now. What I was trying to get to before I kind of wanted to fill in that influence piece is that you can see on the right, the so-called right, that it tends to be very mental. There's a mental capacity with the right, and there is a clarity and lucidity to the right at times that is undeniable. But there's also at times a bit of the it's a bit devoid of the human like capacity,
Yes.
right? Okay. On the left, you get this overflow of emotion, and we've got to help everybody, and everybody's a victim, and there's these perpetrators in the world, and we have to protect ourselves against their potential perpetration, not even the perpetration itself. And what they could use is a little more objectivity, right? So if we were to kind of sprinkle a little dust and, give a little bit more heart and emotion to the right and a little bit more objectivity and clarity to the left, we might be able to, form a very interesting cohesion. But from what I'm seeing, that's a very, very difficult task ahead of us.
I think it is a difficult task, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. We need to have the clear light of day in our thinking. We need to have strategic thinking. Now, one of the things that oftentimes the conservatives are accused of is always choosing self-interest above interest for others. That's the dichotomy between the two sides, choosing interest for everybody or self-interest. And the reality is neither one of those are going to work. We have to find compassionate ways in which people are cared for on the most basic level so you can have some dignity of life. That's true. I totally believe that. On the other hand, you also have to have the power to be able to follow your own passion and see that your own needs are met. And so there's nothing wrong with self-interest. As a soul, you're here to develop yourself. You should have interest in how you're engaging with life in the world. There's nothing wrong with having self-interest. There's also nothing wrong with caring about others who may be in a less advantaged position and are having a really hard time bringing themselves up en masse. So that said, going on to what your little wrap on that part is, if you're in a time of revolution, it's highly unlikely that you're going to strike this beautiful place in the middle, because the energy is demanding that we tear ourselves apart, at least and polarize into an actual position that we stand for. Because revolutionary times astrologically, as you know, the energy calls for tearing the house down so we can rebuild it. That doesn't happen with lovely compromises.
We're not in that place. And,
Yeah.
I cover a lot of this material, 4 days a week. And the theme of this last week's series of shows is about the long reach into the educational system in our country. And there was a young woman, a teacher from Indiana, who got fired by the school she was working at because she wrote a paper about these new programs that are being instituted in public schools about social values. And really what the program is, it's a level of indoctrination that the school really shouldn't be empowered to administer to the kids. And she saw it for what it was. And she wrote a paper about it, and she was fired. She was fired on Valentine's Day.
That's a shame. That is, and I have to, I'm with you. I think the woke, quote, woke movement, I really would like to know who's deeply embedded underneath that. Because what it does is it gets people to deny their feelings, their own identity. It has a lot of self-denial in there to make a person feel disassociated with who they are.
Yep.
In favor of a social conditioning program. So I'm not into the woke thing at all. To be awake, to be conscious and awake spiritually, yeah, I'm all down with that. That is not being woke. In fact, for anybody that hasn't seen it, it's hysterical. Have you ever watched the Tracy Ullman show?
Long time ago.
Okay, so you can find her, and she's still producing, believe it or not. And she's hysterical politically, right? And in one of her shows, she had a skit and where she plays a psychologist in a self-help group for woke young people.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to watch it. And another one, she plays an overindulgent mother who she's so proud of her children because they're getting some interaction online. And it just makes her heart feel good to know she has some friends. And then it opens the door to the daughter's room, who's a teenager, who's fat shaming some other poor girl.
Right, right.
The son is just spewing out vicious stuff online. It really
Right.
kind of tears down. I mean, it's wonderful to have a good laugh at how far things have gone. And I think Tracy Ullman is one of those people. She's a British comedian that really hits it on these fronts. So just for a little comic relief. But the larger point is, I'm with you. I don't think the woke movement is helping society. I think it's basically neutering us.
Well, I think it's been driven by CPUSA and, you know, the former Communist Party, which really at one point in time were the Bolsheviks. And this what we're dealing with is Bolshevik revolutionary culture. And I can't tell you how many examples that I could bring up if I could spend the next 24 hours online just talking about people that are embedded in city and local and state governments. And their job is to do exactly what they're doing, which is to revolutionize the system from the inside out.
Yep.
And it happened. I saw it happen in Austin just recently. They overhauled the entire educational system in Austin for more of this kind of SJW, social values, all the, you know, in my estimation, complete and utter garbage. Really, kids should be getting an education. But what do I know? I'm over the age of 40, right? And what was really interesting about this is not that they did it. That's like, you know, that's cliche. I know that's going to happen. But the guy that did it, the guy who drove it, is a guy by the name of Paul Cruz, and he was the superintendent. And as soon as they got that new paradigm rolled out and signed, sealed, and delivered, he left the school district. And he got a big time promotion to work for the University of Austin, right? Texas, UT. So it was like mission accomplished. I could move on now. That to me was quite telling.
That is interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's a really, if you go back toward the whole social conditioning and woke movement, it's extremely hypocritical in terms of literally silencing people from their own expression while protecting just splinter groups of people in terms of perception and treatment. And this is not right. Everyone does have the right to be themselves, express their uniqueness, and also express themselves the way they wish. And I'm not talking about hateful stuff. I'm just saying to be natural in our expression and our interaction. We're all growing. You know, we're all on a learning curve when it comes to what we can and can't accept, which if you want to in a little bit, I'd love to get into a fascinating conversation about the real essence of conservatism versus progressivism, because this is really embedded in all of it. And it's embedded deeply in us too. But anyway, so my point is, it's very sad to see that social conditioning is working its way all the way through, and that you have people like Cruz going through and seeding this throughout the region.
Absolutely. And you see it on city councils and city council memberships and, you know, Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, which is another part of what we're dealing with as well. And even in your state, in the state of California, they just recently passed this bill where people who are independent contractors can't have their gigs anymore. You're aware of this, right?
I'm not aware of it. What are you talking about?
Oh, so there's this bill.
Contractor.
You better sharpen up on this because they just passed.
What is the bill number? What's the name of it?
Let me find it real fast.
Almost
really
everyone
quickly.
I know with our independent contractors, none of us have heard anything about it.
Okay, hold on.
I'm an independent contractor for Gaia.
Maybe it's because they're in another state. Okay, so the independent contractor bill in California. All right. Let's see. California has a new law for contract workers. So it is Assembly Bill 5, which
Assembly.
was
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
I'll look
So
into it.
you gotta look into it because the first that I heard about it was when I was on this website. That's a website for the Golden State Warriors,
Mm-hmm.
and it's owned by SB Nation, which is owned by Vox Media. And once this bill passed, they had a lot of people that would go in and they'd write and they'd get paid. They weren't paid employees by Vox Media. But once this bill passed, Vox Media cut everybody. And they just kept one or two people because it was against the law. Right. Now maybe it was a way for Vox Media to downsize their staff and
Yeah,
all that
maybe.
stuff.
I mean, it's
But
interesting.
they
I
cut them
will check it
loose.
out. I'll
Yeah.
check it out.
And Tessa Dick, who is Philip K. Dick's widow, has been on my show a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
She's a writer. She's lost work because of this bill. She lives in California. So what we're dealing with here is and it was kind of funny, at least for me, because I rarely call into talk radio, but today I called into talk radio, a station out of San Antonio, and they were kind of kicking this thing around. And I said, look, we're dealing with 50 years worth of momentum that started in the mid 60s when you had people like Saul Alinsky and Bill Ayers and the Weather Underground and the radicalization. And by the way, that radicalization of the left was completely supported by corporate interests as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Oh,
so
yeah.
So it's not like, these are Molotov cocktail, throwing wahoos. These were people that were backed, right?
Absolutely.
So all that started in the 1960s. And what we have seen is 50 years worth of momentum. And now the tide is breaking. And it's now like this wave of the Huns are starting to move across our landscape. And this is kind of the woke idea of consciousness and who these people think they are and really believe to be true. This is what we're dealing with now.
Yeah,
And
no, I agree with you. And when you get to the political scene, we're talking about total corporate establishment politics. It's corrupt. Doesn't matter what side you're on. It's absolutely corrupt. As soon as you get those big political corporate forces involved, it's corrupt. I'm watching with horror and with humor as I watch what's playing out on the left. When you start watching all the different outlets and how each person is being treated depending on the corporate interest of the media outlet, for example. This is not cool. We've got to buy our brains back. And that's why I said this whole discernment thing is extraordinarily important.
Yeah. Today I had this realization when I was talking on this show, and I said where people are right now in this awakening process. It's like all of a sudden you find out that you've got stage 2 cancer.
Yeah.
And it's like there's an alarm. And what are you going to do about it?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. People are freaking out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
This has happened. They're like, whoa, where did this all start breaking down? One thing, just to go back also to the point you were making a moment ago, in terms of the left being essentially supported by the corporate world. This reminds me, it just flashed into my head, something Aaron-Russo told me. Do you remember Aaron-Russo?
Of course, great.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
He only did 2 interviews. I did one of them with him. He was dying of cancer. I think it was bladder cancer. It was painful. But in any event, Aaron let me come to his house. I had to really work with him to let me do this. He ended up using that to hand out that interview to hand out at his showing of his documentary. And so one of the things he said in the interview was that he was dating one of the Rockefeller daughters, if you recall.
Yeah. Yep.
And he was told at a dinner party, because he was a hot producer in Hollywood. I think he was the first $1 million producer with the film The Rose. So he had a reputation. He was welcome in their family. Okay. And he said, whichever, and I can't, forgive me, but I cannot remember which of the Rockefeller brothers was the father of the one he was dating. But they
Yep.
said, you don't think the women's liberation movement was an organic movement, do you? And he said, why? And he said, we funded that. Look at how much more money the Federal Reserve makes if you can get that many more people on the payroll, paying their federal income taxes, right?
That's right. Yep. And the other part of that was, and we get the kids out of the houses earlier.
Yes, get
So,
the kids
so,
out earlier.
so we
Break
get our hooks in their brains.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was a major revelation. And then you look at Gloria Steinem, who it's been exposed that she was a spook. She worked for the CIA.
Yep.
So now you have the promotion of feminism vis-a-vis Gloria Steinem coming through the intelligence agencies as well.
Absolutely. And, I felt it at the time. I've always kind of, personally, my father called me anti-establishment by the time I was 7 or 8. I didn't know what it meant. I had to look it up. And he said, you just won't follow anybody's programs, which was a problem in school and, so forth. But the thing is, when all of these movements came up, I could feel and smell a rat. And even though I was a woman in a very vulnerable position at that time, as one of the first female sportcasters in the world, I mean, there were only 2 or 3 of us. So I was very vulnerable. I was in a man's world all the way as a person who was not a feminist, who was just a woman, a person.
Right.
Finding out how I could best navigate my way through that world and keep my job, which is not easy in that world. But there was something so hollow in the words of those kind of iconic feminist leaders of the day. Did not feel right to me, didn't sound right. I never promoted it. I never went anywhere near it. So I have to say, I'm not surprised to learn that there was that kind of ugly pinning to it as time went on, underpinning to it.
Yeah. If you get into the work of Susan Sontag and really dissect it, there's some really troubling sentiments in her work about not just independence, but neutering, castrating, wiping out this masculine part of our culture.
Not cool.
I mean, it's very radical stuff, very, very radical stuff. And and again, that's coming out of that body politique. And if you look at the history of communism and socialism, it was fostered and founded by corporate interests. Absolutely. All along. If Leon Trotsky essentially left New York with millions of dollars in silver and was taking it all. Who paid for that? Who was paying for Trotsky? It was the corporate banking interests in New York. And they were helping to fund ultimately what became the Bolshevik Revolution. And we're right there right now. It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Same thing happening over again. A revolution, though, now in our country. Okay.
That's right.
So that was a really ugly, bloody one. And as much as, you look back on the time and say, well, the royal family had it coming to them. The Tsar had it coming to them. Look at the wealth they had. And it was interesting because Jack Barsky, the former KGB spy, and I talked about this as well, about Russia, because of the moves Putin has made to install himself as, prime minister, so that he can essentially live out his life in control of things. I'm reading a very interesting series of books by a man named Malcolm Lance, which are absolutely fascinating on how deep the KGB roots are extending into our government and all the way back. Putin's background. This guy is was a counter-espionage agent. It sounds to me, I don't know his background really well, because I haven't looked him up that deeply. His work is impressive because it's very detailed in terms of the intelligence end of it. And I think that Russia and Putin have been really where he spent a large part of his time in his career. And he's writing about this. And so I asked Barsky, I said, what is happening in Russia right now? Because the whole world is going through this revolutionary phase. It's not just the United States. And I said, when his entire cabinet resigned a couple of weeks ago, over here, we took it that these people were like, oh, you're interrupting the system and you're trying to co-opt power once again. We all assumed it was in protest. He said, no, it was not in protest. It's very clear. Russians, he said this, he said, the Russian heart loves a strong man.
Mm-hmm.
They enjoyed having their czar in the day because it was more of a rural peasant mentality, and they felt that on whatever level they were somehow cared for. And the same thing under a strongman and under communism and dictators. He said it's inevitable they would find their way back to a dictator and never really let go of that, because they want a papa, they want a strongman as their leader. Well, we've got a lot of that stuff coming in to our country now, and a very direct pathways and routes and liaisons, relationships and such. I don't like it. I'm not down with this at all.
Yeah. Well, if you go back into Russian history, their great patriarch was Peter the Great.
Yeah.
And Peter the Great was 6'11". He was a giant.
I didn't know he was a giant.
Oh yeah, he was 6'11". He was huge.
So they really got a big papa.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Romanovs were not Russian, by the way. The Romanovs were German.
Yes, I know they were. They were all related to the who became the Windsors.
That's right. And there was great antipathy and outright hatred for the Romanovs because they weren't Russian, and they were having to hold on to their dynasty for as absolutely as long as they could. But they were ripe for the picking, right? I mean,
they were ripe for the picking. It was cruel what happened in the Russian Revolution. The way they were taken down, to me, is one of the great travesties in history in terms of abject cruelty. And I don't think there's any excuse for that under any circumstance. Take them down, move them away, send them to another country. You don't do it that way. Again, that's when your heart knows what's right, regardless of what this, quote, movement was supposedly doing for the people, which in fact was a lie and never did for the people in the end anyway.
I mean, in a perfect world, I think that would be a wonderful thing. But if you're starting a new totalitarian regime, you're not handing out free passes to the former rulership. You're lining them up and you're shooting them, and you're going to take them out in cold blood, because that sends the message. And one of the things that I've been talking about for a while is that what we're really dealing with here, Regina, ultimately are gangs. They're like gangs. They're like organized crime syndicates. And sometimes they work together, and then sometimes they don't, and they put hits out on each other. And that's where the strong man or the capo comes into play. And you know, it's the Godfather, right? And and which, you know, of course, Trump plays that role, and he plays it perfectly. That's the role that he plays.
He came in these times where we were supposed to create a huge dichotomy, polarization and revolution. You had to have someone be the central player to peg it in, have a very clear standing of who and what you are, so people can react to it and tear apart one side or the other. He had to play that role. As you know,
right.
I didn't vote for him because I don't like a lot of his moral character on many levels, so I'm not a fan. However, I said even at the time, something and someone like him had to occupy that position in order to get the show on the road, the revolution on the road.
And I thought, I agree with that. And I feel like sometimes we're also prisoners of our own relationship with time and our own set and setting in a lot of ways. Like if we could move ahead, say 30 or 40 years, we will see this time from a very, very different perspective. And we will see certain things that will have had to have occurred during this time.
Yes.
Where we're so entangled in the emotion of our historical moment that we can't see that. We can't see it.
Absolutely. And you know, if you don't mind, do you mind if I skip on into the subject we were talking about before you and I came live on with your audience about to take it down home, to take it into our own being and our own heart? This whole notion, and this is where the kindness does come in. We're living in such heated times where people are tearing each other apart. Thanksgiving, you can't even have a Thanksgiving dinner anymore in this country without someone having to either really zip it or leave the table. Didn't used to be like that. You could politely kind of have an engaged discussion and disagree, but our emotions are so inflamed. That's not even possible now. So when I said earlier, the notion of kindness, I think we have to, with at least the people very close to us, our loved ones, try to cut each other a little bit of slack, because we're going to end up feeling in total despair if we take on every single little thing as an insult or a slight in some way. We can't afford to do that. And we don't need anyone doing it to us. We don't need to do it to someone else. And so
Right.
that gets me kind of that one thing I said I wanted to mention. This came from a woman named Sarah Payton. I just love Sarah Payton. She's a very, very kind counselor. She's a counselor, a therapist that uses language at the basis to help people dissect what they're getting at through their use of language. And she's also a deep student of nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's program. But she said there was, when we were doing her interview, she mentioned a study that had come out. And this really ticked a lot of people off that watched my conversation with her. And I thought, I didn't really quite, I kind of understand why, because of the polarization. And what it said was that there was a study that was done that set up a set of questions to Republicans and then to Democrats, conservatives and progressives. And they asked the questions in a certain way to get a very specific response. And they did. They found that whenever information having to do with taking away the things that make you feel good and stable are involved, conservatism, to conserve, to want to hold on to the things that serve us, we think serve us and make us feel good. That's including conservation even of the planet, trying to take care of your little garden and water your trees. That's conservation, true conservatism. But if you threw in anything that threatened that fear became the dominant influence. So it turned out that fear was the dominant influence behind conservatism. When asked the same questions, what happened with the Democrats or the progressives is they did not show patterns of fear initially when the questions were asked one way, until they were asked in the way that elicited fearful responses. And the progressives turned into conservatives. Flip side of it, the other set of questions asked said essentially, if you had everything you needed and wanted present in your life, how would you feel about extending help to so-and-so, so-and-so? So they flipped the list of questions. The conservatives became progressives. Okay. Once everyone felt like their needs were going to be met, that nothing was going to be taken away from them, people's hearts opened up and they were more generous. I think this is who we are. And I bring it up because, rather than pointing fingers at a progressive or a conservative, we all embody aspects of that in ourselves. With me, for example, when it comes to friendship and family, I'm uber conservative. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't like to have confrontation with family and friends. I mean, if you have to speak about something that's uncomfortable, do it politely with love, make sure everyone's comfortable. And so I'm very conservative when it comes to my relationships. I have friendships for a lifetime. I don't want to lose them. When it comes to other things, I'm uber progressive. It's like, hey, this isn't working. Let's give it a shot. And every one of us has, if we can take that down into our own psyche, the elements of where are we holding on to things, as you said earlier, kind of burning identity. Where are we holding on to things in ourselves that actually aren't working for us anymore out of habit, like you said? And where might we actually be best served to say, you know what? I think we need to open this conversation up a little bit, because I know one thing, this hurts, it's not working. So we have to move forward, look forward, and get comfortable with moving into the unknown. That's essentially what people consider progressivism to be, kind of charging forward into the new or the unknown. Also, if you get it down to the political descriptions of it, a lot of conservatives would say, yeah, enabling and spending money on people who they think don't deserve it. Forget all that. Let's just forget the political, connotations of it. On a personal level, where are we conservative and where are we progressive? And how does this extend out in our treatment of others?
So, how would you feel if 70% of your income was taxed and given to the government for the so-called greater good? Would you be okay with that?
I probably, it depends on the situation. It honestly does, because I'm kind of progressive that way.
But what if you didn't know? What if you didn't know? Just like taxes now, you don't know where your taxes are going to go. You have to have some kind of blind faith and trust in the people that are administrating that it's going to go to the right places, right?
I don't.
So without knowing, it's like you're going to get 70% of your income taken away for the greater good, and you may have to go into some place where you're uncomfortable. How would you feel about that?
Depending on the situation, because I tend to be outside of relationships. I tend to be I'm a risk taker. I always have been. I put myself in so many situations where I've literally lost all my income to take a chance on something that might not work. So I'm not a good.
But that's personal risk for you and your own career, right?
Yeah,
this is not a personal. This is you saying, I'm going to sacrifice a very significant part of my earning potential in order to subsidize some other thing that ultimately I think may be better for us, right?
I hear you. And first of all, I'd have to say logically, I don't really support anything if it's not being explained. I need to know the nuts and bolts behind it. I'd have to know where the allocations of money are going. Also, on just an intuitive level.
There's not a great track record for that, though, right? I mean, like, look at Obamacare. Nobody really broke that thing open and really look. Oh, we're just going to pass it and we'll deal with it. So I think that the track record for stuff like that is absolutely terrible. Governments are not in the business of being transparent. And I think for them to be able to automatically all of a sudden find a conscience and say, hey, we're going to do this now. I think it's asking a bit much, but that's my piece.
I totally hear you. And I get that completely. Now, that said, this revolution is for purpose. This isn't a political revolution. This is a spiritual revolution, whether we want to call it that or not. And so, if you listen to some of the more esoteric people, I interview a lot of channelers and psychics and all of that. And the one thing that has come up perpetually is that we're moving into a time of greater transparency and greater service of the higher good. So I always take the spiritual message into consideration. I can't really fathom at this point in the US where anyone would come up with a 70% tax program. I think they'd start taking from the military industrial complex, which should be defunded, in my opinion, by a great amount. Take money from the places it's being absolutely wasted, where trillions of dollars are going into secret black holes of funding things, bring it out into the daylight and start allocating it toward things that actually help human beings. So I'm much more aligned toward taking it from where it's being unfairly gained and distributed into the place where more people have access to it for programs that serve. So I can't see a 70% tax rate even on the table. I don't get it. Intuitively.
Okay, I took an extreme number so that you'd have to make a decision around that, right?
Well, in France, for example, I think they have a considerably higher tax rate. It's something
close to 70%, by the way.
Is it now? I remember last time I was looking into it, was closer to 50%. And I wouldn't choose to live under that situation. But when you're looking at certain of the lifestyle issues of people, for example, in Europe, first, I'm not nationalistic, but I love this country. I love what we do. I love our creativity. I love what we can piece together because of that creativity and the young spirit and that spirit that's happening now of revolution. I trust us in the long run to craft something together of a better, higher nature. We know that the system as it exists now is utterly broken. You can't have that massive disparity in wealth occurring anymore. Can't have it. Doesn't mean not to allow people to make money and be creative and live in a capitalistic society. I'm down with that. But I am not down with squirreling money away into dark places that favor a few. I'm not down with that at all. And
I think we're in agreement with that for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's where most of the money is. Go get the money from those places. Easier said than done, but it can be done. Right? It's like
I think we're, for me, when I look at the Democratic debates and the candidates, I think we're going about this completely the wrong way. We're asking the wrong questions. We're looking at the system as the system that we've been involved with for a very long period of time in overhauling the system based on some, kind of parallel paradigm that grows out of, socialism or communism or social democracy, which is what Bernie Sanders likes to call it.
Capitalistic social democracy. Yeah.
But I feel like they're missing it by a country mile, right? Because when they talk about healthcare and Medicare, or for healthcare for all, or Medicare for all, they're not talking about wellness. They're not talking about our food. They're not talking about genetically modified organisms. They're not talking about the onslaught of vaccines. None of this stuff is being tabled, right? So these are really particular things that never come into the debate. And you may know this, but might notice this. I'm watching a revolution take place with medical doctors who are dropping out of the AMA and becoming functional medicine practitioners. Yes. Like, that is happening. None of this is being addressed. None of it. Marianne Williamson touched on it just a little bit, right? So they're going about it from the wrong perspective. Money. It's like, why do we have such a really, really difficult time with money? Hello, it's called the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
We're basically buying money that's printed out of thin air, and then we're charged debt for it. The only person that ever talked about that was Ron Paul. If you really want to change the system, we're having the wrong dialogue, and people they're being basically split into these ghettos, these ideological ghettos, and they're not asking the right questions. We're not having the right dialogue. And this is the thing that frustrates me the most.
I hear you. And I agree with you in that all of these things should be on the table for discussion. Can the political system, as it is structured now, which is really unhealthy, address all of them? I don't know. I would like to think.
I don't think so. I don't think you can.
But let's just go back to socialized medicine for a moment, meaning Medicare for all, right? Let's go back to that one thing. Now, I've been in ERs all over the world. Okay. I have a birth defect. So I can't even tell you how many times I've been to the ER, and it's life-threatening. It's not like a broken bone, okay? I don't get help, I die. So I have crashed all over the world. And I have to say this, the meanest country I have ever been in when I've crashed is the United States. The only place I've come close to dying is the United States. So when you need care, medical care is for when you need it. We have to have a personal revolution, which we do with our dollars, not just our votes, with our dollars and our allegiances when it comes to things like organics and getting rid of Monsanto and so forth. That's up to, at this point, the system doesn't accommodate for it. So it's up to us. I've been making those choices for 25 years.
Sure,
and I always put my money, I'll always put it on the healthier option if I have any choice. But getting back to healthcare, this is one mean system. Every other.
Why do you think it's mean?
Because when you get in there, all they care about is the money and the paperwork.
And where does that come from?
They leave insurance companies.
It comes from their indoctrination and their training.
I totally agree.
This is the way it is. This is how the system is, and this is how you're going to do it.
I totally
and it depersonalizes the entire process. You've got to change the indoctrination.
I agree. We're totally in agreement.
Yes.
The difference, I'm going to tell you functionally as a person that spends a lot of time in the ER. The difference is here, it is about indoctrination. It is about money. They never look at your whole thing. They don't even listen to your story. Do you know where I had the very best care in the world? India.
I believe it.
Pondicherry. This was a former French provincial town, so to speak. And it's all, it's not a big power player in the country. People are still wearing their native traditional wear. I mean, this is very, very Indian, part of Indian society. You see almost no Western clothes on women at all. And when I crashed there, someone who, I knew someone who was with the Sri Aurobindo group, and they had a hospital. Now, their doctors are Western trained. I happened to come in at 6 a.m. with a Western trained endocrinologist from Boston University, Indian man. The most compassionate care by far. He simply said, please tell me. And so I told him my story. And he said, okay. And so he went ahead and he listened to me and treated me like I was telling the truth and knew my body. He said, administer the potassium ringers. Let's administer the cortisol. We'll get the drip going for you. He understood because I understood my condition. I could tell him nuances people would never know. And so I'm in this place with colorful fabrics and curtains blowing with the ocean outside, quiet, beautiful. He lets me lie there for a couple hours till I got all the potassium IV drips inside. And then he said, "How are you feeling?" I said, "I think I'm weak, but I'm good to go." So I got going and I said, "How much do I owe you?" He said, "No, nothing. You can pay there if you wish." Now that's like the best of the best. But crashing in Buenos Aires, England, Germany, France, I've been in ERs in all those places. No one asked me for cards and paperwork first. And they never made it about the money. They let me in and they took care of me and didn't charge me a dime. Now, there's something generous and beautiful and humane about that. So we do have to approach it on whatever level we're capable of addressing. Right now, our political system can't do all the lovely things that we have to do, that you're talking about. I don't go to doctors ever. I only go to alternative medical care people. So I'm with you 100%. Our system's so broken, I'm terrified of our doctors. I won't go to them unless I only go to the ER. I never go to the doctor.
Well, you know what they don't have in all those countries that you mentioned?
What?
The AMA.
Exactly. This is a big problem. Big problem.
So fundamentally, none of these. So when we get into the AMA, we get into big pharma, and it's this interlocking like cyclone fence, right?
Absolutely.
That keeps us boxed in to the paradigm that both of them support. Then you throw the insurance company in there, and you have an orgy of malfeasance, in my estimation.
I'm with you. Yeah. I agree 100% on
none of this stuff. Yeah. Now Bernie says he's gonna do all these things. Well, that's great. That's wonderful, Bernie. How are you going to deal with big pharma and their vaccine program? Big pharma spends more money than any other entity in lobbying in this country.
Yeah.
Like huge amounts of money, right?
Well, I'm
so
on
how
you on all of this, so you know.
How are you gonna deal with that, right? It sounds really good on paper, but you're messing with the titanic forces of nature, right? I mean, that's really what it's boiling down to. And these entities do not give up their positions of power very easily. They don't.
You have to start with baby steps. And all we're seeing here is an attempt at the first baby steps of reform. First of all, if someone's hit by a car, or if someone like me is crashing and someone drags their body somewhere, you don't ask for their frigging documentation and money first. You take care of them. That is humane. That is why that part of it, it's a baby step. It's not complete by any means. I'm in agreement with you on every issue you've brought up, but it's a step better than where we are now. And I'm only looking at things incrementally because we're at the beginning of this revolution. Give us a chance for our hearts and our minds to come together in a higher spiritual, energetic bath, so to speak, when these dark energies are off of us. And I think we're going to come to some really amazing constructions, but we're not there yet. We're just still trying to tear the house down and apart.
Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on Bernie? What do you think he has a chance? And what do you think in America under Bernie Sanders would be like?
I think he does have a chance. It's everybody, argues back and forth, but I think Bloomberg didn't help himself the other night. He was shredded.
Disaster.
It was a disaster.
He should never even been in that debate. He should have just been on the outside.
He should have never been. And yet he bought his way in, and he's going to keep buying ads because most people don't watch debates. They don't want to take the time investment. But we know one thing's happening. The younger people, the millennials with the message, let's get this student debt off your back and allow people who do not have money to have an education beyond high school. These are very appealing messages to the younger generations, as they should be. When I was in college, which was only for a minute, mind you, I was, like I said, rebellious and terrible. I just went right into the news industry. But, it cost something like $50 a unit for school here, okay, in California. It was essentially free education when I was young. Anyone who wanted to go to school could go to school. That's not the case anymore. So I think for the younger generation, the millennials, getting that debt off their back, having a raise in the minimum wage, which is critical for even at $15 an hour in California, you can't live a decent life. You'd have to have 2 or 3 of you making that in a household to still live a decent life. But it's a little step beyond where they are right now. Baby steps again. So I think that the messages of raising the minimum wage and so forth, these are all humanistic. They're ethical and they're moral. And I think people are feeling such an incredible moral decay happening around us right now, all the way up into the entertainment industry. It's exemplified everywhere that they're looking for something that speaks to their humanity. And Bernie has been consistent for 30 years saying the same thing. How he negotiates it, if he's elected, in terms of drawing that money out of the military and a tax on the super wealthy, we'll see. I mean, that's the plan, but how will that go? You have to see once it's in practice, but that plan would cover those costs. So I think he has a chance because people's hearts are hurting and they want to feel like someone cares about them. And really, no one else out there is really caring about humanity at large to the same degree he is. I don't have a problem with socialized medicine. I've asked many people, are you willing to give up your Social Security, which came in a socialistic era? Are you willing to let go of Medicare for your grandpa? Everyone says, well, hell no. I said, well, you're a socialist at heart. Do you like the subsidies the wealthy are being given and the oil industry is being given? No, that's socialism for people who are extraordinarily wealthy. I have to pay my taxes. They don't. Okay. That pisses me off. The wealthy should be paying their fair share of taxes. And we're talking about massive influxes of money just from that. So yeah, in that sense, I'm totally progressive and humanistic. I want the most humanistic person to lead the way. It's going to be messy and ugly and bumpy, and we don't know how it's going to work out. But the other night in the debate, in fact, Bernie was the one that said this. It was interesting. Well, how do you feel you're going to come up with the money? He said, well, every other country managed to do it. And the fact is, when we were attacked in World War II, we were not prepared to develop monetarily at all, to develop this massive military operation and machine that would give us world dominance. But we pulled it together. We found the money. We did it.
You see, I mean, to me, that's just a fundamentally wrong answer.
Yeah.
I mean, because the attack was architected.
Yes, we know this. Let's not get into that part. It's true.
But I think that's important, though, Regina.
It is true.
I think it's really important because he's building a case on a fallacy and a lie, so he can sell his program. And to me, you can't start something new by creating and building a new structure on a completely dishonest idea and a completely dishonest piece of information.
Which part are you calling dishonest about?
Because we were attacked. We were attacked because we provoked the attack. We knew the attack was coming.
I agree. We know the story.
To me, this is where I get really hot, because that shit is never addressed. It's just swept under the table, and now we're building on really shaky foundations, right? We meant the cause of World War II. Well, we were tricked into World War II. We were tricked and we were duped. We were duped by the same damn corporates that Bernie wants to take out.
I would say with knowledge.
And it's like, this is where I get pissed. This is why I want to take a laser beam to all of them. I'm sorry.
I get it. Let me ask you this, Robert. Do you think the system we're in now is working for the average person of any kind?
Well, let me say this.
Not working.
Why did Donald Trump get elected?
Because people wanted some kind of radical change that was going to.
The left had left the middle America. They abandoned middle America. Democrats abandoned middle America.
Don't get me going on corporate democracy. The corporate
Democrats. They left. They were abandoned. And now they're looking around. They say, who the hell is going to help us? Right. That's how we got elected. So there were those people where the system wasn't working for, and there's another group of people that the system isn't working for. Right. So let's not just say that one group is being screwed by the system. No, we're all being screwed by the system.
Do you remember
all of us?
Corporate politics, establishment corporate politics is not working. Trump came in as an outsider who it turns out isn't an outsider, but we got tricked into thinking he was an outsider. We all know that. It didn't benefit anyone, but the perception was we were making a change, and perception matters right now. So now you're looking at the polar opposite, which revolutions tend to do, and you would be
Right.
more toward someone like Bernie, a polar opposite of that philosophy. So
Yeah.
look at it and say, we are in these times. Can we do this pendulum swing with any kind of love and dignity? And then it'll then start building something toward the center. The DNC and the Democrats hate Bernie. He is absolutely hated. He gets almost no airtime in traditional media. They hate him because he's threatening their corporate structure. Okay, so
Right.
he's hated by both sides. Okay, so you have to look where. This is one thing people, that kind of gets me, that people aren't really paying attention to. If you're talking about the cabal, the structures that have literally the handful of structures that own the entire media in this country, all these platforms and their kind of sick partners they're in it with in the digital world. Now you learn one thing, and I learned this when I was a news anchor. The media is no different than Pravda was under communism. The stories that are out are the stories those at the top allow to be out. The people that are being supported and get all the airtime are the ones that are allowed to be supported and getting the airtime. Why isn't anyone looking at this fact? The media, the cabal, hate Bernie Sanders. This is a huge this is a huge red flag for people. They hate him. He cannot get airtime. Anything happens, they'll talk about the other three candidates, even if he's ahead or winning or ahead in the polls, gets almost no mention. Why do they hate him so much? What is he a threat to with the cabal? And he is a threat to the cabal. So I'm just saying, let's be practical and look at it. None of this is perfect at all. I mean, and I'm not using that as just kind of a staged, bumper sticker. I'm saying, if we are in these revolutionary times and we know what's happening right now isn't working, we're going to have to try something new. It might be sloppy and ugly. But if everyone just kind of goes into their heart and says, what appears to have the most potential on a humanistic, ethical, and moral level, whatever you think that is, whoever you think it is in the world of politics, that's where you should put your energy, and not behind some story that's been concocted to make you feel that something in your world is being protected by someone else. That's instrumental thinking. I'm saying be intrinsic. Go to your heart. Go to where the truth is, not the emotions that are being swayed like this, but the truth. It's baby steps forward in a revolution. What's going to work better than where we are now? And make a heartfelt decision from there. And I don't mean in a fuzzy, sentimental way. I mean that cold, clear, very clear view that the heart has. As you say, the heart is not sentimental.
Yeah. And again, to that end, I look at this idea of $1,000. Yeah, I'm gonna have my hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, so
now I can hear you.
Yeah, so to this point, right? This idea of the $15 an hour minimum wage. I think it's, number one, it's a fairy tale, and I think it's dangerous. And the reason the reason it's dangerous is because there are independent businesses, mom and pops, that can't afford to employ people at $15 an hour. You know who can? People like Home Depot, people like Lowe's, all these big corporations that Bernie Sanders seems to detest. They're the only ones that are going to be able to handle that $15 an hour wage, okay? Mm-hmm. The other thing is that we're about 10 years away from a massive influx of AI. And those $15 hour wage jobs, they're going to go away. So that's a fairy tale, and it's disingenuous. Again, at least Andrew Yang was willing to talk about AI. He's the only guy who's willing to even talk or bro. It's like, okay, well, we're just going to go with this change, and we're just going to buy into this and see where it goes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the future that's coming with AI and robotics, it's going to be a brave new world. Nobody's talking about that. And for me,
actually, yes,
it's just a Band-Aid.
I agree. I mean, now conferences are starting to take shape, talking about what we're going to do to create any kind of sense of wisdom around the use of AI, because the future is frightening when you start looking at it. I'm on the same page with you on that.
It's not addressed by any of these candidates, though, and that's a problem.
Yeah, it is. But again, I think everyone's kind of choosing up as per where they are right now in their thinking, the things that they align with. There is so much, every single thing has to be up for review, Robert. Not any just.
Why? But Regina,
Yeah.
You're a newscaster.
Yeah.
You're a very thorough investigator. When people ask about you, I say, I've got so much respect for Regina because she prepares unlike anybody I've ever been around. Like, you are a thorough preparer, right?
It doesn't mean I know everything. It means
but what I'm trying to share with you is that when I see those candidates and what they're bringing to the table, to me, it's just so shallow, and they're just pandering to the largest block.
I agree.
How can anybody not get down and say, this is what's really going on here, and how are you going to address these things?
Right.
Never covered.
You know what, though, where it is covered, which it depends again on the level of intelligence of the audience. This is a big part of it. Is oftentimes when you have them broken down into like little town meetings and so forth, where people have a more cozy environment to bring up all of the other issues that matter, not just like the big four issues, which you get for a 1 minute or 60 seconds. You get a 60-second answer. You're only going to talk about the big blocky, not subtle things. So, I mean, I love the fact that Andrew Yang was there. I like Andrew Yang. And let me ask you this. How did you feel about his big, he's a big proponent of universal income.
As long as it's not tied to putting a chip in my palm or my wrist.
Yeah. Hello.
I would say, or it's not tied to having mandated government vaccinations.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd say that's something we should probably explore.
I think we should too. I liked what he had to say. I actually even liked a lot of what Tom Steyer had to say on certain levels, on certain levels. Right. I mean, but I like a little bit of what each one brings to the table, because each one has a little pet area that they tend to be a little more compassionate on. And I really go with compassion a lot. And that's why I think in the end, the one who's bringing enough of the chunky, blocky issues to the table that have more of the flavor of humanitarianism, that happens to be Bernie. Buttigieg, I don't, no.
Mayor Robot? No, forget it.
No, there's something there about the McKinsey Institute and his background with Zuckerberg and everything. No,
he's a cutout, right? He's funded by the Pritzker family out of Chicago.
Exactly. So I didn't see a single thing of value that he has offered to the conversation, but Yang did. Yang had a lot to offer.
Well, he's been on the inside of Silicon Valley. He's kind of a sharp guy.
He's a sharp guy, and there's a play. That kind of voice has to come in. Whoever ends up, if Trump is out and a new government, a new regime is in, so to speak, I think people like Yang have to be folded in. Although yesterday, and I can't remember what it was, look it up yourselves, I think he started partnering with Bloomberg on something.
Andrew Yang's a capitalist. He's made a lot of money.
Yeah, right? Yeah. That part I don't like. I thought his other messages of universal income and addressing AI were extraordinarily important.
He's a Capricorn. He's ambitious.
Okay, there you go. So I'm basically, and I'm just to tell you, my position is, I love the earth. I'm not one of these people who's looking to jump off after this incarnation, say this place sucks, it's corrupt, it's dirty. Go back a few hundred years, all right? I actually have a great amount of affection and love for the earth itself, just for her creative potential and beauty. I love humanity. I actually believe in human beings. And I think we're actually a better species than we were 300, 500, 1,000, 2,000 years ago. I mean, we don't go and watch people be drawn and quartered for entertainment with blank eyes anymore. Where the lights are coming on. I have faith in us. And I have faith in this revolutionary period, as choppy and ugly as it is. And as much as I feel tears behind my eyes a lot of the time, I have faith if we can get through it with a degree of grace and kindness to each other while we tear the house down. I think we're going to build something better. I don't think we're going into a dystopian future, and I very much resent Hollywood and the players that are trying to program young minds with the consciousness we're moving into dystopia. I despise what they're doing to young minds in this way. I'm very clear about it. They could just as easily be putting out functional messages having to do with creativity and beauty and inventiveness. You don't see that in any films. That is disturbing to me. That's the social programming, is to lead us down that road.
We're on the same page, totally with that.
Yeah. I mean, we are spiritually on almost everything, just the way we get there. I think you and I have some.
I'm more of an individualist, Regina, I think, than you are. I think you're more of a collectivist than me, and that's okay. And I'm not down with, you know, like, I like groups. I've got a great chat room there. Mm-hmm. I have great Facebook groups. So I have my own version of collectivity, but but it starts from a different place. Let me ask you a question. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to Generation Woke. Mm-hmm. In many cases, the millennials, maybe some Gen Z.
I think Gen Zs are really going to shred this place and tear it down.
Oh, well,
they're going to be interesting. I love it.
But let's use the millennials, right? One of the big hashtags on Twitter is #boomer, mm-hmm. and it's not a flattering hashtag.
No, it's not.
Okay, you're a boomer.
Yeah.
Okay, you're a white boomer.
Yeah.
And you're a white woman boomer. Mm-hmm. And in the eyes of many people who are in this kind of burn it down culture, you're part of the problem.
Exactly. And you can understand that. If you're young, look how we looked at our parents and our grandparents when we were that age. That's normal. Okay. They're the problem. They created this problem. But really look at the difference in what the boomers inherited. Granted, post-World War II, I was raised, we did not have any money. Okay. Our shoes flapped. These millennials don't go around with flapping shoes. We were given, if I wanted something, I had to go babysit, comb people's hair, wigs, iron their clothes if I wanted to have something of a personal nature that my parents couldn't afford. And I did. I took all kinds of babysitting contracts. I worked my butt off as a little, and this was at 10 years old. 10 and 11 on, I was babysitting other people's kids, ironing their laundry, and I learned how to do hair so I could comb their little wigs for Saturday night dates and card playing. So it wasn't an easy life. However, look at what we had access to. Okay, the GI Bill, people could have an education. By the time I was out of high school, you could literally go, I went and got a job in San Francisco. This is kind of an interesting little piece of history here. You saw the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Yeah.
I was working for that man when that murder occurred.
Oh.
Okay. I remember the police. I remember the black wreath on the door. Everyone's crying. We're all like, what happened? You know? Mm-hmm. So I was living in that time, but at that time, I was a receptionist and bookkeeper in his fancy San Francisco based salon. Okay. Watching all these very wealthy white men living their double lives. It was really interesting, very interesting cultural education for a young girl. Okay. But I literally had my own apartment on Diamond Street, a block off of Castro, in a wonderful old building with a clawfoot tub. It was a studio, a nice little kitchen, big bathroom, hardwood floors, bay windows. And I could afford that as a receptionist, and I had money to spend on food, my public transport. I was able to go to my favorite dress shop and buy a new dress every month if I wanted. I lived well as a receptionist, making nothing per hour, basically. The millennials don't even have a chance at that, no less saving a few. For then, if you could save $4,000 to $6,000, or even, that was in California, you could buy a house on that. For a down payment.
Do you think being
have a chance?
Do you think being a receptionist would be meaningful enough for them?
Meaningful for them?
Yes.
Being a receptionist, I don't think it's particularly meaningful. It was interesting.
Well, I know, but but this is one of the challenges.
No. I'm just saying,
with the millennial,
I had a low-paying. The point I'm making here, Robert, I had a low-paying job doing insignificant work. And yet I was still able to pay for my own apartment and lifestyle. Now, granted, if I'd wanted to up my game a little bit, which I didn't back then, I could have been making more money doing something more meaningful and had an even bigger apartment. The point is, you can't have your own apartment unless you're very, very highly skilled, trained, and educated now in San Francisco. can't do it. I don't blame them for their resentment. The only way they can get ahead is if we leave them and endow them with some inheritance or something, or a home, so that they have a chance of the kind of life we had a chance at, because we were a product of the post-World War II time, where we were, quote, the victor, where money was made available for education and housing loans and all of this.
And we manufactured things in this country.
Absolutely.
China was this place over there, and
yeah,
you got Chinese food from people that weren't there anymore. I mean, that's really what the extent of it
your cheap goods came from Japan and West Germany.
That came, yes, Japan was in the game, but we were still manufacturing.
Yes, we were.
The globalists had not sunk their teeth.
That's right.
Into the global markets, and the Democrats and the progressives did not at that time yet sell out the worker, which they did when they got on board with the globalists.
Yeah, well, I think I would not go down party lines on that one. We've been sold out by much higher forces than that all along.
But they should have really advocated that these places in like Erie, Pennsylvania, or Ohio, right, instead of getting steel from Ukraine or getting steel from South Korea, right, keep these plants open.
Yeah,
but they didn't.
I agree.
They didn't.
I totally agree with you. So millennials have, on one hand, I have a millennial son. On one hand, there has never been a more catered to generation. I mean, roll out the carpet, give them everything you never had. Don't make them work hard for it. Pay for their college education. Make sure these kids get every single advantage and chance that we never had. And virtually in my little white world, right? Mostly white world, that's kind of what people did. If you could afford to, you put your kids through school and all the way through college, and you took them on vacations if you could afford a vacation, or camping, things we never got to do. We didn't have money for things like vacations, right? But they had the advantages of being kind of supported in a new kind of more open way by their families. They were given more, certainly given more than any previous generation was ever given. And yet at the same time, so much less, when you get down to the deep economics of it, has been made available to them. Mm-hmm. So it's really caught between a rock and a hard spot.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm with you on that. It's tough for them.
It's tough. I mean, one hand, wait a minute, I had a nice life. Now I can't do those things I could do when I was living at home with my mom and dad. And they're angry and they're frustrated and they can't buy a home if they want to. I totally get that. On the other, there was a sense of entitlement that came with that. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a sign of the times. They came in to help burn the house down. They're the ones young with energy right now. Let's change the system. And they need to show up and do that and be part of that. That's just, everyone chooses the time they incarnate into. And we've all incarnated into some pretty rough times in the past. This isn't the worst of it. I think it's really important to get real and understand no one is a victim here. Every one of us chose to incarnate.
I think it's a great statement. It's a great statement. And I will say, maybe I'm being a little bit tough on the millennials today, but I also know some very creative, very talented,
oh yeah,
very switched on millennials that take responsibility and accountability for their lives and their creations, and they're doing fantastic things.
Absolutely.
So I just don't want to put everybody in a bucket, right?
No, it's not fair, because the millennial people I know happen to just be some of my favorite, most creative people. They're the ones putting together the really great, creative, organic little places around here, for example. They're the ones giving a truly wholesome quality of life to the picture now. So I love the millennials, but I also understand where they came from, what they were born of, and the frustrations that they have. And I also understand, hey, I would say, guys, don't be so hard on us. We raised you with everything we didn't have. And so that you could have more, but you got totally left holding the bag economically. You got screwed. Okay, so we'll help you fix it. Let's not be so angry at each other on this. I don't think that's necessary. Now, when the Z's come up, oh my God, I think it's going to be a very interesting world once a Generation Z comes into their early adulthood, because that's what Scorpio generation. They're not afraid to look at the tough stuff. They're going to call you out.
Well, Gen Z's Pluto and Sag. They're the Sag kids.
The Sag kids. Okay, I thought
they do not like millennials, by the way.
No, they do. Oh my God, you should see the politically incorrect, horrible things my stepson is sending in emails to his dad about wokeness and feminism vis-a-vis millennial feminism. It's like, you know, I think we need to just tell them to tamp it down a bit here, but they're stripping all the masks off.
Yeah, the Zoomers are going to be a force. I've got a Zoomer, and it's kind of interesting being around him. And,
wait a minute. So wait a minute. I was totally wrong. I thought the beginning of the Zoomers was Scorpio. Where did the Scorpios end up?
The Pluto and Scorpio ends right around 1996.
Okay, good. All right. So thank you for correcting me on that. Okay, well, fire in the sky, Sagittarius. Yeah, they're not going to let anybody off.
Truth, baby. Well, what's interesting about the kind of the first, there's like the Zoomers are broken down into two categories, and you've got like the first group, which is born around 96 to about 2000, and they've got Neptune and Uranus both in Aquarius. So those kids are revolutionary.
Yes.
That group is very revolutionary. And then after 2000, around 2001, Uranus goes into Pisces. So that second group is going to be even different than that kind of, you know, they'll be connected with that Pluto and Sag thing and Neptune and Aquarius, but the Uranus piece is going to be very, very different for them.
Well, I think the millennials and some of us old boomers are trying to help tear the house down. We're all trying to do it in our own way. I just say, I think it's very, very important to not be too hard on each other, because we're each trying to survive this in our own way. And I'm not saying that in a pappy way. I'm saying if with this amount of polarization and despair at large in the stars, permeating our media, trying to trick and fool us all the time, sometimes all it takes is some unkindness with someone close to us when we just kind of puddle and fall apart. Who needs that? Let's go out of our way to try to cut each other a little bit of slack during these revolutionary times, because the revolution is on.
You know, I was going to try to circle back to that point, and I think it's really important because we are nodes of consciousness.
Yeah.
And we're like relay stations.
Yes.
And if we can hold the space and help other people save a little face.
Yes.
That it can have a ripple effect in a way that we don't comprehend or understand.
I couldn't agree more with you, Robert. Yeah. And I do need to let you know that I have a meeting in the little gold mining town of Auburn in 20 minutes. It takes 15 minutes to drive there. So I have just a few minutes left with you. I've really enjoyed our spirited conversation.
This is good, Regina. I like this.
Each other.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I know we don't agree on everything, but I know that we agree on a lot, and I think we respect each other a lot.
Very much.
And that's where I feel like this is the template, right?
Yes.
This is the template where we could have meaningful conversations.
Well, if I were there, I'd give you a big hug right now.
Wow, that'd be great. And I've hugged you before. You give good hug, Regina.
Thank you. Well, Robert,
let me just do a quick few questions here.
Sure. Couple quick questions, and I got to go.
Okay. Regina is too young to be a boomer. How about that? Gen X.
Do you want me to tell you something?
Yeah.
I never, because now it's getting to the point where people ask. I'm not too young to be a boomer. My birth defect, I don't create cortisol. Cortisol ages us. It goes in and tears apart our musculature, our collagen, our bodies, our organs. It tears us apart. And that's how we age, is an overproduction of cortisol, meaning don't let yourself get overly stressed because you're just pumping this stuff out and it ages you. I end up in ERs because when something bad happens, I don't have any cortisol to save me. I go into shock and then you die if you don't get treatment. But it helps me not age in a normal way.
So you have found the fountain of youth. How about that?
I have. You just have to be willing to put up with quite a bit of pain if you want that one. I wouldn't recommend that birth defect to anyone.
Well, Regina, hey, thanks for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to catching up with you shortly and getting into the astrological cycles of the spring, right?
Absolutely. That'll be coming up in about a month.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good, Robert. Thank you so much. And thanks to your audience for hanging in there with us. I'm sure they're thinking, oh my God, the fur's flying here a little bit. That's okay. Love you, Robert.
Love you back, Regina. Have a great day.
Thanks. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye. That was Regina Meredith. How about that, huh? That was a great show. You know, we were able to you know, cross some ideologies and cross a little bit of swords, and got a little fire, got a little passion there. And it was good. So I think you got to learn a lot more about Regina, and even, you know, how we can dialogue, maybe debate, and keep it at a high level, right? And that was a good show. What do you guys think? What's going on in the chat room? Beth, wow, wonderful show. Love you both. Great show. Best chat on the internet, without a doubt. And we have 100 acres already. That's cool. Make a copy of your seed words. Okay, I like that. Let's keep it going. Wow, my hair is standing up. All right, cool, man. The first two are True Mojo. I like the third one the best. However, what else we have here? Let's see, what else? Man, there's just a whole dialogue going on in chat. Whole dialogue in chat. Really cool stuff. Really, really cool stuff. What else do we have here? Robert Regina for president. That'd be interesting, huh? The current system requires the right to rise up, to do the power behind the modern left. Hopefully we can reach some balance at some point without too much strife. We'll see. We'll see. Great show. Thank God it's over. Okay. Great show, Robert, Regina. Where have you been, man? Where have you been? Look who's here. What do you think Jasper is? Do you think, let's do the Jasper cam. Jasper, what are you? Are you a conservative? Are you a progressive? Jasper, what's your political persuasion? He says, I'm a cat, fool. I'm a cat. That's where, oh yeah, there you go. All right. A little bit late there, Jasper. Anyway. All right, everybody. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. Appreciate your participation. If you like the show, if you like the content, you can feel free to sign up, subscribe. I'm going to have a link at the bottom of the show page, which will be listed here beneath the video. There are different levels that you can subscribe to. And what else? Oh, next week, Ra Castaldo is going to be in the show. He's going to be in the house. We've got a kind of a special show lined up. And then 2 weeks from today, we're going to be talking with a millennial, a creative millennial, a millennial that believes in MAGICK, magic, Alex Kazemi. And we're going to get an insight into sort of the occult, esoteric, and magical mind of millennial alchemists. So you don't want to miss that show. You're going to get a front row seat with a very specific and particular type of culture. And it may surprise you. You may at times feel a bit, I don't know, perhaps startled, shocked, but you might be surprised as well. Anyway, opening up for different ideas, opinions, pieces, points of view, different nodes of consciousness. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'll be back on Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. And thanks again for being a part of today's show. It's been a Friday FARcast. And for me and Jasper, use your head to discern what's real and your heart to stay up in what's possible. Take good care.